let the C-SPAN viewers know exactly what the problem is, because the media doesn't seem to be telling them.
When we end the wars overseas, bring the troops home, and allow the healing to begin, it will be because of you.
They did everything they could to keep Tulsi Gabbard off that debate stage because they didn't want to hear what she had to say. There are soldiers currently deployed who weren't even born when the war on terror began. There's no reason we need to spend taxpayer dollars on defending the soil of Germany, France, and other. The longer we stay where we shouldn't be, the more problems we're going to be causing.
Millions of Americans swear an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic. And then they are sent overseas to fight and kill and potentially die to protect the interests of billionaire military contractors, cynical politicians, and foreign dictators. When they come home, they are subjected to the very worst healthcare in this country and treated like second-class citizens. They deserve so much better than that.
I will bring the troops home. I will turn America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral. There is no reason why we need to continue to be the policemen of the world.
That drives it. You are the power.
The Veterans Administration is among the worst in our healthcare system. This top-down monopoly is unacceptable for any person, let alone those willing to sacrifice their lives in service to our country.
Joe Jorgensen is going to end the wars and bring the troops home and treat them to the care that they deserve and allow the healing to begin.
We need to have a strong military defending our shores, but there is no reason for us to be defending the rest of the world. It only makes things worse. We've got to come home. I'm Joe Jorgensen, and I approve this message.
And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network here at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty, mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course, our older generation, Generation 1 and 2 at coalitionradio.us. It can be said fairly that we have, in many respects, the worst of all worlds here in Rhode Island. Despite being an astonishingly beautiful place to live, despite having incredible people and incredible talent, and incredibly gifted, despite having a culture that celebrates diversity, that celebrates every aspect of diversity. Despite all that, we often suffer, well, in a number of critical areas. As we enter the 2020s, if you will, we have a nation that has left many of us behind. And despite whatever particular political stripe you may believe in, if you are a human being, if you are sentient and you care about people around you, then you understand that there are people less fortunate to you. There are, in this state, a monopoly, if you will, on mass transportation. And that's another subject. Tonight, we're going to discuss how well mass transportation serves its citizens, and at the same time, discuss the ever-present pressure for this mass transportation system, if you will, to bend to the will of a few select individuals and a few select interests. Fortunately for Rhode Islanders, there is an organization that looks after, if you will, looks from the perspective of the ordinary, customer of mass transportation. A group as diverse as Rhode Island is of itself. There are folks who are corporate executives who use mass transportation in the state. There are folks who, for any one of a number of reasons, occupy the lowest economic run on our ladder in this state. Both of those folks depend on mass transportation, but the question is, how well are they served? The RI Transit riders occupy a unique role in that mix. Through perseverance and hard work, members of this organization over the years have been able to permanently, if you will, place riders on the board of directors, which, if anyone knows anything about governance, particularly in this age, that was an astonishing feat in and of itself. We'll talk about that. Our guest is, of course, now officially inducted into the registry of what we call repeat offenders here. Amy Glidden is a teacher, writer, and activist based in Providence, Rhode Island. She's appeared with us before. She's the co-coordinator and social media manager of RI Transit Riders. Since 2010, RI Transit Riders, formerly RIPTA Riders Alliance, has been the voice of bus passengers in Rhode Island. They've lobbied against fare hikes. They've been the voice of the elderly and disabled to maintain no fare passes. I might remark editorially at a time when the state was willing to give folks free tickets if they went to the Paw Sox, yet denied folks access to some of our most important alternative food sources in the food desert, otherwise known as the urban core of Rhode Island. They wrote a bill into law, as I just mentioned, requiring the RIPTA board to have a disabled and regular route rider. Today, RI Transit Riders, is once again defending Kennedy Plaza as a place for the people, as it should. Amy, welcome back to the coalition. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Pat, it's so good to see you and to be here. And gosh, I wish we weren't discussing the plans to destroy Kennedy Plaza over and over and over again.
It would be nice if there was a time that we could be discussing, if you will, and from my perspective, obviously a competitive marketplace, but from your perspective, a service that existed at a fair price that served all potential riders, that used modern safe equipment, and was able to avail itself of some of the latest technologies that have been, will make mass transportation safer, more cost-effective, more competitive, and also leave a cleaner footprint for the environment. That's a conversation you and I are going to have someday, right?
Definitely, and actually, there's news that RIPTA definitely wants to go all electric at some point. That's their a goal eventually. So that's great. I do want to go back to something you said though about RIPTA having a monopoly on the state. And I know with your political views that may not seem like an ideal thing, but I do want to explain why that's good for RIPTA in this particular instance. And that's because when you have a single agency that covers the whole state, it's much easier to get funding from the federal government.
Right.
So they discourage competition in that way. So just wanted to provide that little tidbit.
No, and it's a good one. My hope is that someday, and this is why I want to have you on the show, to educate me and dispel urban myths and the confusion and the chaos that typically surrounds Rhode Island government for any one of a number of reasons. But I look to a day when folks who are, say, employed from the community, from the suburbs at large, that are paying, if you will, their own way in a fair basis, and it not be indiscriminately, from my perspective, placed on the working poor. So, I think there's probably a commonality. There's a meeting point, as we've always discussed, in between those two perspectives, with the ideal being the best service possible for the riding consumer, because mass transportation is an important part of city life and urban life. It does take people off the roads. It is and mostly is safer, and it provides, if you will, an alternative to transportation to support a city's cultural and nightlife. So it's an incredibly important part of urban life. It's just a question of how do we do it better. So, and of course there is the ever-present specter of the landed gentry, if you will, of one of Providence's most favorite sons, looming over Kennedy Plaza, who is hell-bent, if you will, to eliminate the very people who need Kennedy Plaza the most. So let's we've got all the time tonight, so take a look, if you won't mind, a few minutes, and talk about the history of the organization and where we've come to at this place now.
Yeah, well, I just can't resist saying, I know who you're talking about, and if you're talking about Kennedy Plaza and the big, money players, you can't look into the mirror, if you will, and say Kennedy Plaza 3 times without Joe Paolino appearing. So
click your heel 3 times.
Yes.
or is it not the click your heel? Is it more like Beetlejuice? You tell me.
Yes.
Or is it both?
Yeah, Beetlejuice.
Beetlejuice, Paolino. No, I can't say it. I'd be doomed to the 7th circle. So, but tell us about your organization, because people who may have missed your last appearance when we were at our old location, we've got a little bit more technical capacity here to redistribute tonight's show to a variety of sources. And I think it's important that Rhode Islanders understand that there is an advocacy group for writers, and there is a group with a citizen's voice, if you will, in the boardroom.
Yeah, so definitely. Folks can check us out on Facebook. We have a group people can join, Rhode Island Transit Riders. On Twitter, you can check us out at @TransitRye. And to fill in the history of our group a little bit, it started back in 2010 and brought together people from the environmental community, people from the social justice community to work on a common cause of advocating for passengers, and just with really a focus on equity and the fact that, just because passengers of the bus, on average might have less money doesn't mean they shouldn't have all the rights of someone who, drives a car. So we feel that, bus passengers, they deserve the same rights as users of other transit. So I'll give you an example by what I mean. So, the bathrooms at Kennedy Plaza right now are closed. They were closed temporarily, and they've been closed temporarily for 6 months. So no bathrooms at Kennedy Plaza, but are the bathrooms at the train station open? Yes, those bathrooms are open. Are the bathrooms at the airport open? Yes, those bathrooms are open. I've even been to ferry terminals where the bathrooms are, yes, open. So if those bathrooms are open, why does the bus bathrooms have to be closed? So we really look out for those issues where bus passengers are being discriminated against, where they need someone to speak up for them. We have lobbied successfully over several attempts by RIPTA to raise fares over the years and won each time. And, we will go out, we used to be called RIPTA Riders Alliance, but we changed our name because we felt that we didn't want people to think that we just endorse RIPTA or we support what RIPTA does. We're not affiliated with RIPTA in any way. And so this mission, we've worked with other groups on, issues of homeless rights. In Kennedy Plaza, that's a big issue with, it's a public space. Everyone has a right to be there and no one should be pushed out. And so we really feel like it's a space for everyone, and our role is just to really be a voice for the voiceless. People don't have money, they don't have time, they don't have influence, and we want to rectify that.
No, absolutely. You mentioned it. The dark shadow, if you will, over all things Kennedy Plaza, obviously, is the Paolino group. Joseph Paolino, former mayor. Still, and I'll editorialize a little bit. I never like to put my guests on the spot, so you can just ignore my babblings. But I say former mayor, but seriously, someone who appears to feel like he's mayor for life. He's the shadow mayor of Providence. He avails himself of certain airwaves routinely with an unchallenged position that would make him appear as the second or third coming, depending on your religious persuasion, of Jesus Christ himself, who has nothing but concern for the denizens, if you will, of Kennedy Plaza. To your point, I'll amplify another situation. There was an attempt to, I guess about 2-3 years ago, as we say in the Blackstone Valley, for him to make illegal cigarette smoking in Kennedy Plaza. He did not seek to do that in Federal Hill. I missed the signs announcing that on the east side. I missed it also on virtually every other part of Rhode Island. Just pure coincidence that, again, as the possibly the single largest landholder, if you will, in Kennedy Square, his attempt to put a shine on it for his corporate trade. That, unfortunately, went nowhere, as most things Joe Kennedy tries to do. Joe Kennedy, did I say that out loud? Wow, Joe Paolino tries to do, as he almost kind of fashions himself as a Kennedy-esque figure in Rhode Island. But, again, it's aimed like a dagger as one advocate likes to consider those folks, the visibly poor. Because in his fantasy world, he turns, Kennedy Plaza, not into from a working part of the city, which services folks of every conceivable background, including all the folks who work in the Turk's Head area, the financial district, what's left of downtown retail. All those folks avail themselves of mass transportation at one time or another because, newsflash, that's where they work. If they work for the State House, it's a quick walk. If they work in state government, if they work at JWU, if they're a student at any one of the half a dozen universities downtown, that's why Kennedy Plaza is there. But in his fantasy world, it goes away and it turns into, I don't know, some bougie open air, wannabe hipster flea market mixed in with a variety of espresso, cappuccino, and shops and upscale marketing. So is this going to end ever, Amy? I mean, is this just going to be a relentless attack until he somehow sneaks something through?
Yes. So that's such an interesting question. And, I want to go back to just very quickly what you said about the smoking. The Joe Pugolino did succeed in hammering that through for a portion of downtown Providence, basically the area of Kennedy Plaza and around it, not all of downtown. And I have absolutely no doubt that the only reason that happened was to keep poor people out of Kennedy Plaza. There's really no other reason for it because it doesn't apply to all of downtown.
Well, shame on me. I thought that, I apologize. I thought that somehow they gotten beaten back. So right now, the only place in Rhode Island that you cannot publicly smoke, I mean, there's obviously cordons around different office buildings, as if they're right. But in terms of public space, what you're telling me is that arguably the only, I don't know, please correct me, but Joe Palino has carved out his own little private Idaho.
Yeah, and I don't blame you for not realizing it because what's happened is, the police don't enforce it because they have better things to do, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
that's a loaded question these days. That Thursday night little kerfluffle that happened behind the police department. Yeah, I was there for that. I saw that. I needed to see that firsthand. I've gone to a few of these kerfluffles. Yeah, we'll just leave them at that. Yeah, they've got a lot of better things to do. Beat the crap out of local citizens.
Having a police presence necessarily is not always necessary. There are places for, social workers and case workers in Kennedy Plaza that I'm sure would be more useful than necessarily needing the police station right there, right?
Right.
But I do want to get to the heart of this issue, which is what is being done with Kennedy Plaza right now. So I think we have to go back a little in time just to give context for people to understand who may not be aware. So Kennedy Plaza has undergone several renovations. There was one done in 2002. There was one done in 2012. There's another one done just a couple of years ago. And, it's sort of an incremental way to, destroy Kennedy Plaza. Like there's this way in which they want to get the people out of there with the hub, but there's also this creeping way where, each time they make it a little bit more inconvenient for people, and, a little more, just a place that, they have a place where you can have a sculpture, in the park and, you can just see them slowly turning it into a park, which is, there's a park right there. And so that's kind of the grand plan for a lot of business people and for the city of Providence is to really turn that area into a park eventually. That is the goal. And so with that in mind, what to do with the bus hub at Kennedy Plaza? So back in 2014, there was a big push to have it built at the train station. And that never came to fruition because what they had hoped would be that a developer would come on board with, more funding, and it turned out it was just too expensive to build a hub over the train tracks. So that plan didn't happen. There have been so many plans, but I'm just going to highlight a couple. The city of Providence came up with a plan that, frankly, I think we could live with, maybe with a few adjustments. And the city of Providence plan would have had the buses through routed through Kennedy Plaza. So the bus is through routed, like it stops in Kennedy Plaza, but Kennedy Plaza is not the final destination. And it would have moved buses to Washington Street and have Washington Street be bus only 2 ways and have a lot of the bursts located there. So, that wouldn't be too inconvenient for people. It is generally in the same area, and the buses are not dispersed to multiple hubs. And I think a lot of people have a misconception of how people use the transit system, because a lot of people will say to me, well, it doesn't make any sense to have a central bus hub because, why is that? Well, the numbers speak for themselves. Out of 15,000 people, this is pre-COVID numbers, that go to Kennedy Plaza, 15,000 people get on a RIPTA bus every day. 11,000 of them get off at Kennedy Plaza. So for the vast majority of passengers, Kennedy Plaza is their final stop. That's where they get off. And the problem we've always had with these plans to move the hub further away is that why would you move it further away when that's where people are going, right?
Right.
You're going to inconvenience over 10,000 people because you want to put a park there. Okay. So, but as I said, the Providence plan, we could have lived with it, One good thing about it is it had a lot of public input. So the hub plan put out by the city of Providence, we had RIPTA always has meetings. They have public meetings. They'll have meetings, in South County, meetings in, the Providence area, in East Bay, public meetings where people can come and they can actually give input on the plan during the planning process. So RIPTA will present a variety of options. What would happen if we had the bus burst here in this area or in this area? And, people can choose which scenarios they like, and RIPTA will take that feedback into account. So the City of Providence plan had a lot of public input. I think we could work with it, And then there was the Paolino Tunnel plan, which I think is barely worth mentioning.
Oh, come on. It's funny in its own twisted way. I mean, this is a guy who treats Providence like it's, all right, so we used the Beetlejuice analogy. Remember in the movie Beetlejuice? We haven't watched it. It's your homework assignment tonight. Somebody go out and watch it. But in the movie, they had the little bas relief, Playtown with the rail cars going through and, the whole thing. That's how Joey Paolino, I believe, sincerely looks at Providence. Is its own little, he's got little scooter cars and, matchbook cars or whatever and Hot Wheels. And he goes down to his basement in the morning and he's got Providence and he runs his own little magical Providence. I'm convinced that's how he looks at it.
Absolutely. He paid a firm $75,000 to come up with this plan. And, that just shows you, AOC, our congresswoman, came out with a saying recently, if you're a billionaire, you don't make money, you take money. I think he's made so much at this point that he's taking, right? So, yeah, if you can just drop $75,000 on your own personal plan to remake Kennedy Plaza.
Well, this is a guy who, and again, let's have some fun with this. Let's lay it all out. This is a guy who, his family has made a lot of money here, and God bless him. And by all accounts, it's been done legally. So, yeah, whatever. Congratulations. But for him to take tax breaks to build a boutique hotel, to me, is just disgusting. Because at what point in time do you just pay your own bills? I mean, when is enough that you've made off of Providence that I'm not looking for anybody to give him or him to give, but why do you need a special tax break? Why do you need tax incentives to build things? I don't care if everybody else gets them. It's wrong. These cities in Rhode Island are broke. Rhode Island, Providence, regardless of whether you like the politics of it or not, Mr. Palino, the city of Providence has $1 billion unfunded pension liability. That's a billion, that it is mathematically impossible for them to ever pay. And yet you're out there pimping for and I use that term intentionally, as ugly as it is, you're out there, you got to get a tax break. You can't just build the damn thing on your own. Excuse me, I'm done now. Thank you. my God.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to circle back to that, but let's just go through the latest plan. No doubt with some Joe Paolino input. That's come up, which actually has come out from RIDOT, which I think is interesting because the RIPTA, RIDOT, Raimondo would like to merge them. People may not be aware of this, but RIPTA is actually a very well-run agency. It had a balanced budget last year. On its own, it can get more federal funding than it would if it was with RIDOT, and RIDOT would scoop money from it if it was part of RIDOT. It would. RIDOT scoops money from bicyclists, pedestrian things all the time.
Grandmothers, everybody. I mean.
Yeah, and RIPTA's got a balanced budget. RIDOT goes, tens of millions of dollars over budget on things all the time. These are not two things that should be merged. RIPTA does great on its own. And so RIDOT, maybe this is a chance for them to sort of prove their worth. Came up with this plan to have 3 bus hubs. And so one bus hub would be at Providence Station at the train station. And that bus hub would have about, 25% of traffic. Another bus hub would be still around Kennedy Plaza, like in the Exchange Street area, but not directly. And then the final one would be in an unusual and forlorn, desolate location on Dyer Street in the Jewelry District. Dyer Street is right where Eddie and Dorrance meet up. Mm-hmm. If you're traveling down and you see that brown building for continuing studies, it's right there. It's a piece of land that National Grid owns. A National Grid building is there. And so Brown Continuing Ed, right next to it, land that National Grid owns in the National Grid building. Talk about strange bedfellows. I mean, National Grid and RIPTA working together and RIDOT, strange times. So the idea is that at this location in the Jewelry District, which they're promising us is going to be the Innovation District, right?
Of course.
This Jewelry District, this is an area where they've had a tower. They're offering millions and millions and millions of dollars in tax breaks to have someone build a, ridiculous tower there. That project's frozen. Recently, a piece of land that was worth, if I'm not mistaken, $38 million in that area was sold for $100,000. Like, this is not an up and coming area, people. And I think they should have hung on to that land for a little bit longer, because that's just a shame. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, this isn't a good location for a bus hub. There's the river, there's a parking garage. This isn't an area where people want to go. And it would be an area where about 50% of the traffic would be put in this area, and that is almost a half a mile away from downtown. So what that means is that most of the buses are going to be going to this Dyer Street hub. People who want to go to Kennedy Plaza will have to transfer. And a transfer costs $1,
right,
to get to Kennedy Plaza. So we are talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are having to pay an extra $1 every day to get to their destination. Now, RIDOT has some funny way of doing the math where they say, we've tracked it, we've done the numbers, and, only a few hundred people will have to transfer. Well, I would say, how do they know that? And how do they know that those people are going to continue with those same traffic patterns? A lot can happen to make people commute in different ways. And especially in these COVID times where people's jobs are up in the air, people are leaving jobs, working from home, finding new jobs. This isn't a good time to be building a bus hub and placing, predictions of traffic patterns, because we don't know what's coming after this. Like, it's not really a good time for this move. It's not really a good time because the administration's going to switch over, and who knows if the administration after Raimondo is going to want to work on this project. So we think for a variety of reasons, this is just a non-starter for us, this multi-hub proposal. And again, we're talking about a hub in the greater Kennedy Plaza area that would be about 25% of passengers, a hub at the Providence train station, about 25%, and then about 50% at Dyer Street, which is where Eddie and Dorrance meet, in a really desolate area, apparently in agreement with National Grid. And I'm sorry, but I don't want to put RIPTA passengers at the mercy of National Grid.
Right.
I don't know a lot about public utilities, but this seems like an odd marriage.
I guess, let me ask you this question. I'm not saying the current situation is perfect for anyone, but first of all, to your point about, these times of COVID, it is the height of arrogance of a business, and RIPTA is a business at some superficial level, to force change upon its customers because it's convenient for them, and to simply expect customers to march along gladly. Right now, as far as RIPTA's finance is concerned, that one change may be that final straw, if you will, that line in the sand for a lot of people who may say, you know what, I'm not comfortable traveling in compressed situations with a lot of people. I have the opportunity to continue to work at home if I like to. And those two ingredients plus, all right, now during and let's not forget, despite this afternoon's weather pleasantries, 6 or 7 months, 8 months out of the year, New England's a rough place to live. I mean, winters can be pretty abusive, and the summers and can be pretty tough. So to expect that people are going to either make another transit jump in the form of a transfer, or to walk if financially they have to, all right, is just the heart of arrogance and hubris. I don't understand that, where they're coming from.
Yeah, and even if RIDOT is saying, it's only 600 people we've determined that will have to transfer, how would cars feel if they said only these 600 cars will have to pay a $1 toll?
Right.
It's bus passengers are always asked to do things that other transit passengers are not. I mean, anytime something's redone, every time Kennedy Plaza has been redone, passengers have been further away from amenities. Sometimes, the transit is moved when there's like a marathon, a race or a special event. And it's very confusing for people. I've definitely, heard from people that, if you're a blind person or if you're a person with a developmental disability, when RIPTA does these moves all the stops around, it's hard to adjust, and to find your stop. Right. And I think having 3 hubs, that will be very difficult for people.
Well, what is the overriding reason to change? Why? Well, if you go back to the movie Big, when the young Josh is playing with the Rector set toy, and he goes, I don't get it. And everyone looks like, what do you mean? I don't get it. So educate me, help me out here, because okay. I don't get it.
Yeah, there are 2 things. So there's not in my backyard, right? So right. The reason why we've had so many plans, and Scott Avedijan said recently, there have been 7 plans in the last 2 years. Nobody wants the hub near them. The jewelry district is already, said, and I think, it's fair of them to say, we weren't informed of this. And Rhode Island Transit Riders wasn't informed of this either. I mean, we were invited to a meeting to see the plan a day before the media saw it. We had no member of our organization, no rider at all had any involvement in writing this plan. So no bus rider saw it basically before it was unveiled to the media and to us. And so it's not in my backyard. So, anywhere but here. And this is a place we'll put it. And I think it's also just a sense of if you build it, they will come, with the innovation district. And as I've explained, the city just giving away land basically there for nothing, in the hopes that someone will build something. And I don't think we should be thinking of transit that way. I think we should put transit infrastructure where people already want to go. Mm-hmm. If 11,000 people are getting off at Kennedy Plaza now, there are not going to be 11,000 jobs created around the jewelry district area, Right.
Yeah, not, it wasn't going to happen before. It's certainly not going to happen now. It's just, the big checks. I mean, the state's out of money, so the big checks the state will have to give away to get people to the land they've given away, to use the mass transportation that we moved at our own expense. It's just not going to happen. It's fiction.
Yeah. And the city is really trying to sell it as something that's deliberate, because the hubs are roughly on the downtown transit corridor, which is RIPTA repurposed I think it was about $17 million in Tiger Grant money that was going to be for a streetcar route. And they used it to build high frequency buses every 5 minutes, running from downtown to the hospital, and, along Dorrance and Eddy. And they really haven't marketed this. So I'm kind of questioning, what really is, what's the agenda here? Because the downtown transit corridor, there was never a big splashy unveiling. I haven't seen any advertising for it. And now all of a sudden, the transit hubs are on the downtown transit corridor. It's just a little funny, Now,
no, absolutely. Now, what's happened to this bond money in the meantime? I mean, this bond money was supposed to tell us a little bit of the history of the bond. It's an enormous amount of money. Has it been spent? Has there been any sort of transparency or accountability for this? And where do we stand with that money?
So the $35 million in funds was in 2014. And I want to be real clear on this. I'm going to read you the actual language of the bond so we can get clear on what's to be done with the money. Mm-hmm. Approval of this question will allow the state of Rhode Island to issue general obligation bonds, refunding bonds, and temporary notes in an amount not to exceed $35 million to fund enhancements and renovations to mass transit hub infrastructure throughout the state of Rhode Island to improve access to multiple intermodal sites, key transportation, healthcare, and other locations. So what RIDOT wants to do is use all that money on this foolish plan, when the bond very clearly states mass transit hub infrastructure throughout Rhode Island, multiple intermodal sites. And I don't think they meant multiple intermodal sites in Kennedy Plaza. No. And RIDOT has kind of tried to rewrite history here and say, well, that was the plan all along. It was going to be used for the train station hub. Well, that isn't the language in the bond. I don't know about, everyone, but I know, I'll be honest, sometimes when I go, I'm reading the bond language for the first time, not always up on all the issues. And so, your average voter saw that, and that's what they voted for. They voted for $35 million to be spent on infrastructure throughout Rhode Island, multiple places. They're thinking this could be in my community, They're starting to sort of build little hubs in Warwick and North Kingstown, and it'd be nice to have some of the money to go to that. I mean, these rural areas really need hubs of their own. But Rideout wants to spend all this money on Providence, and I think it's really unfair to the voters. A little bit of the money has been used in Pawtucket, but otherwise most of it is still there.
No, and it remains, our governmental strategy is so focused on Providence to a point that's become nearly obsessive. It's so Providence-centric that it's ridiculous, and yet there are valid arguments to say that Woonsocket is underserved by mass transportation. There are places like Coventry, West Warwick, and yes, Pawtucket, and that there should be more interoperability between, say, for example, the bus, the outward bound bus, Peter Pan. There should be more compatibility with Amtrak. There's all sorts of strategies one can take, none of which includes having to redo for the 25th time, I'm exaggerating, of course, Kennedy Square. There is a vast world in Rhode Island beyond Kennedy Square. How about increasing interoperability and interconnectivity with, Aquidneck Island, which remains, in many respects, because of the defense industry and because of what's left of tourism, remains to be one of the cash registers for this state. Why not make it easier for people who are from the city, who are employment challenged, to work out there on a seasonal basis? There's all sorts of things that you could do. That's a lot of money. And there are a lot of needs in the state, and not all of them need to benefit Joe Paolino. They just don't.
Yes, again, absolutely.
So you've got this bond, and we all made fun of. We all had a good laugh at kind of our expense with regard to the tunnels, but yet they, I'm trying to think of a clean analogy. Well, let's just say that they keep coming back to the trough time and time again, relentlessly. Where does the new poobah of Ripter stand on all this? I'm assuming he's behind all these machinations?
Well, it's strange, I have to say, because watching Scott Avedisian, he comes out occasionally, but it's Peter Alavidi who's doing a lot of the talking on this, and I have to wonder if people at RIPTA, are being pushed aside, in favor of Rideout having more of a role. Not an official merger, but a sort of a silent takeover in a way, and. I'm just, it's sad, I think RIPTA has a lot of great people who work there, and they have wonderful ideas, and I have to say, this plan just doesn't seem to have a lot of RIPTA in it. This seems to be very much to me a Rideout idea. Because the plan that RIPTA
No, go ahead.
The plan that RIPTA came up with the city of Providence, the one that RIPTA did, that was a decent plan. We don't love the idea of moving things away from Kennedy Plaza, but, it only moved them over to Washington Street. So that was okay.
Where is the core? My primary concern in this is, in fact, serving what's called the visibly poor. And you've got two groups within that, if I could be so bold. You've got the working poor, for whom, given the high cost of owning an automobile in the state, for whom RIPTA is really the only resort, the only act in town. And you've got the folks who rely almost completely on a variety of social services. I just want to point out one thing from my own personal experience. There was a point in time where I had a couple of kids in college at one time once, and I spent a couple of years, I worked a third job late at nights, a couple nights a week, in either Boston, a lot of in Providence, as a Lyft driver. Gave me a very interesting insight into the communities. Spent a lot of time on the South End and the West End, a mixture of the working poor, women my age who were, in many cases, were doing 2 CNA jobs at once, going back to back. And It's interesting because from where I live and my quote unquote experience, there were people in my other lives who said to me, "Are you crazy working in South Province?" And I had to tell you, people were wonderful to me. They were absolutely wonderful. There were times, a couple of times when people who clearly were very tired and very hard at work tried to tip me a couple dollars, and I just couldn't take it. Not that I'm some Mother Teresa. I just couldn't take $2 from a woman who's clearly exhausted, working 18, 19-hour days. The reason I bring that up in the context of this conversation is not to try and prove my sainthood or anything, but to point out that in many ways, folks who in the working poor rely disproportionately on ride sharing as a way to get to work. And that to me was infuriating, because if you're making $12 an hour and you're spending $10 to $20 a day simply to get back and forth to work when allegedly we have a functioning mass transportation system in this state, I found just absolutely ghastly. It just makes no sense whatsoever. So what do we do about that?
Yeah, well, I think, expanding public transit in other places than Providence can really help with that. But it's not going to happen if we spend all of that $35 million just on this hub. We need to think about everyone. And I do think, the vast majority of people that use RIPTA probably, they are involved in Providence in some way. I think about the fact that 20% of people in Providence don't own a car. And I think, maybe there's an opportunity for RIPTA here. They've talked a little bit about this, but micro transit, maybe running some smaller buses in certain areas that wouldn't be as expensive to run. Also in the times of COVID would be a good idea. So if RIPTA could offer something, more similar to a model like that, we would, that would be great. A micro transit option could really help in some of these areas where people have no choice but to take a rideshare. Mm-hmm.
No, absolutely. And when I look, quite frankly, we all understand that for a lot of folks, entry-level employment, even folks my age, very often involves a variety of medical facilities around town. So rather than spend this $35 million or whatever's left of it on Joe Palino's folly, simply creating or looking to routes that serve where people work, and particularly on off hours, trying to create a system, for example, is just in and around the hospitals. I can't tell you how many times I picked up people at 11 o'clock at night at Rhode Island Hospital. They were patients. They were a lot of times security workers, CNAs, nurses, people who, again, exhausted, and they're spending their money on rideshare. Now, we've got a defined medical district in this state. By and large, there is a significant presence in and around, Rhode Island Hospital, Women and Infants, and Hasbro. And yet, how well are they served for literally the thousands of Rhode Islanders who work at nights in the medical system? Again, not to obsess over this, but it strikes me that these are people who could be brought into the system to help stabilize the finances. These are people who are continuing to work despite COVID. All right, who desperately need, for whom parking downtown, even if they had the wherewithal to own a vehicle, is expensive. And then there's clearly a network of nursing homes around the state for whom people on a daily basis, 7 days a week, get in and out of work at very distinct time schedules. They all work 3 to 11, 11 to 7, and then 7 to 3. There's no magic to this. So I apologize for venting, Amy, but can you understand my frustration when there are so many wins to be had at times where we desperately need some wins on behalf of ordinary people?
Absolutely. I think you raised a really good point, and I will definitely bring that up. The downtown transit corridor does run to Rhode Island Hospital. It runs every 5 minutes, but is it going to run any later into the night? I think that's a question we really need to pose to RIPTA, because you're right, 11 o'clock is when shift workers get out. Why not have that be a bus? It may not be practical for RIPTA to ride, buses at 3 a.m, but again, maybe that's an opportunity for a little micro transit route that, picks people up along the hospital route. It's possible,
And to your point, the 35 million, this bond issue, and there's two, by the way, there's two types of people in the world who never have to worry about follow-up. Weather broadcasters and people who issue bonds. Weather forecasters, we're so grateful and happy to be on to the next day, particularly after yesterday's events. I'm still without power, by the way. All right, that we've just forgotten about it. And then there are people, government officials, issues bonds. And interestingly, outside of your continuing efforts, your organization's efforts, which are highly noble and effective, right? Who follows up on government bonds to find out if they've really been spent in the manner in which they were supposed to be spent? Is there some annual review? No, there's not. Is there some reporting mechanism? Maybe a little. So, when you see mass transportation bonds going out there and you see educational bonds going out there for universities in the tens of millions of dollars, folks, these are things that we have to pay back. And there's, and bonds are incredibly expensive to issue. There's very often in a bond issue that size, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees involved. There's placement fees. And then there's the interest that we have to pay, which we get a pretty good rate because it's backed by the state in one sense, but it's still a lot of money. So it's to see it not going where it's supposed to, and that's before any money even gets scooped, is just terrible, absolutely terrible.
Yeah, I mean, the voters are the ones that approve this money. They approved it for hubs, throughout Rhode Island, for infrastructure projects throughout Rhode Island, multiple sites, and that language in the bond is very clear. And if all this money gets scooped for Kennedy Plaza, how many things are not going to happen, in other places?
No, absolutely. How late does bus service? You don't mind me asking. This is a very broad question. And if you don't have the answer, feel free to get back to me on this. I would be interested. How late does bus service really run for South and West Providence, the abutting areas of Cranston, where you have a lot of folks lived who are either new to the country, or it's a some tough neighborhoods in there with very good people, but tougher economically. How late can those folks get bus service?
So that's a good question. I actually don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
No, I'd be interested in having that conversation again at some point, because, and again, I'm not trying to characterize bus services only for the working poor, because there's clearly places like Quonset in pockets of economic activity. I think of the Citizens Complex up in Smithfield. I think of CVS up in Woonsocket. There are pockets of corporate activity that could benefit from mass transportation. Not just because there's people in $800 suits who work there, but there's also a lot of support personnel who don't make the big bucks, who could probably use, and I would imagine that, economies of scale being what they are, the more people riding the bus, the better it is, and these are businesses that are still in some form or shape operating even under the dread COVID. What's the connectivity between the cities, between folks who are working and these sort of corporate hubs that have emerged, like, say, for example, the Fidelity Complex in Smithfield? And is there ongoing study between the employment opportunities there and people in the city who could qualify for or be trained to qualify for working in those kind of companies, which will offer them folks a leg up in the economy? They'll offer them good work. They'll offer them, at least reasonable wages. They'll offer them, there's opportunities there for health care and tuition remission, things like that. All the things that get the working poor a step up the economic ladder. Are those conversations taking place?
I would say not too much of that is done. I mean, when you talk about transit-oriented development, you would think it would be talking about that sort of thing, right? Like, it sounds like it would be talking about building transit where people want to go and connecting jobs. But, the Pawtucket Bus Hub was billed as transit-oriented development. And, it's the same as the Jewelry District. Like, where is the development? So unfortunately, I think a lot of times when people try to pair transit with with jobs, the developers that scoop up these projects, they're not really interested in bus passengers at all. They probably don't even want them on their properties.
True that.
But because there's buses coming there, they say it's transit oriented. But I think what you're talking about, that's something we'd like to see in our society, but we don't have. Although, I think RIPTA has coordinated with, some businesses to provide bus service, big projects. I think Quonset, and there's like a Citizens Bank, I believe, that was coordinated with, if I'm not mistaken. So that does happen, but it's not routine.
Well, and it's interesting because to me, that's the intersection. And one of the reasons this network is called the Coalition is that the thoughts were early on, and it's had a lot of success in the respect that you bring someone like yourself or someone like myself who, and we're talking, you represent a tax-exempt organization here. So I'm going to make this very generic. You bring together people of different political backgrounds who are of goodwill. Emphasis of who are goodwill. Not a lot of that going on around today, but let's just take it at face value. All right? There is overlap between a lot of different political thought these days. And if you can bring together opportunities where there is state government infrastructure, and you can marry that to existing economic activity, not pie in the sky, developer-driven bull bleep like you get with the nonsense of McCoy Stadium, the replacement for that, the soccer stadium they want to build in an area that they've deemed blighted so that they can do mixed-use retail and high-end residential. Not any of that crap. I'm talking about where people are actually living and working. And there's a beautiful mix, if you will, of social justice and capitalism at work in that, in the sense that it's an opportunity to lift people up, lift people out of being the working poor, so they can enter the middle class and beyond, and to whatever however they're able to avail themselves of their talents. But the limit is so structural, and this state, as a result, is so blighted because of it. It to me, it's tragic. It's absolutely tragic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hilarious that you say social justice and capitalism because, I have to say I am sort of a lefty, and in my mind, those things don't go together.
But they can. But they can. If there was, see, the problem is, and I don't want to go off the rails here, but the problem is that people, there's so much cronyism in a place like Rhode Island, and it's everywhere, but Rhode Island has got a particularly bad case of it, that folks, as a result, have grown up surrounded by economic failure. And what I mean by economic failure, and let's get back to Mr. Palino, because in my mind, again, not my guess, there's never an opportunity a good reason to miss an opportunity to take a shot at Joe Palino. But I get back to tax, one of the underlying problems behind developing affordable housing in the state of Rhode Island is that our entire development structure, whether it be through the city of Providence, whether it be through Commerce RI, and as a result, the local developers, is that we continue to subsidize at taxpayer expense in one form or another luxury housing. So guess what people are going to build? Luxury housing. There's no rocket science here, but that's not capitalism. That's a twisted, that's a twisted form of cronyism, and that has no place in a place like Rhode Island, in a state like Rhode Island, which is so desperately in need of capital infusion to provide people with a safe place and a clean place to live, and parks and recreation, and a place where there's jobs that can be reach out to every person at every trained level, and with opportunities to grow. That's actually capitalism, the way it's supposed to be, not the way we do it here. So I understand your discomfort because you're surrounded by, a lot of filth in this state, and so I get it. I completely understand why people who might be left of center would look at a statement like that and as just ridiculous. It doesn't have to be, but that's pie in the sky. So the jury's out right now. So where do things actually stand right now? What's the push? What's the timing? How does Joe make his little boy dreams come true?
Yeah, so the timing of this, it's not a quick project. It takes a couple of years. So it would be done in stages. And this is really bad for passengers because the hub at Dyer Street, there's no guarantee that there's going to be passenger amenities like bathrooms or an indoor waiting area at that space while it's being built. National Grid could say they would offer that, but they could rescind that at any time.
Right.
And so I think this, it's a case of, it's the wrong thing at the wrong time. A plan that's going to take this long needs to be a really well thought out plan that future administrations are going to sign off on, that will be durable to changes at RIPTA, durable to changes in administration, and not just have someone say, let's not do the hub at Dyer Street. So National Grid doesn't want to sell it to us anymore, and then they've spent all this money, on Providence Station or on the greater area, but then that can't be completed. I'm really hesitant on this one. It's just not the right place. It's not the right time during these COVID times to be establishing such a long range plan with so much uncertainty. RIPTA doesn't,
absolutely.
RIPTA doesn't know ridership. Yeah.
No, I mean, what we're looking at right now systemically is a sea change in virtually every form of behavior possible. I mean, retail was crumbling before this because of the continued onslaught of Amazon and the net in general. But now, because of this, you've got a huge potential. I mean, I was at the governor's press conference covering that this afternoon. We're starting to see the cracks in the whole August 31st. As you pointed out, there are three communities in the urban core, communities with a preponderance of marginalized folks who are not going to meet, apparently, the COVID numbers in order to go back to school. So again, you've got a significant population of mass transportation being ripped out of the system. You've got a historical change, mostly to the detriment of the community that works in and around tourism in the state. The notion that we're now, as of today, moving bar closings to 11 o'clock, and we continue to cut back and nibble away at whatever little business our once proud, brilliant restaurant industry had in the state, that's going to alter significantly the employment, and that's going to disproportionately affect marginalized communities because, again, entry-level jobs in this state very often were cash-basis jobs to folks who are new to the country and very new to the state. So you're absolutely right in that there's this huge societal shift that is going to happen and is happening in front of us at not at the normal glacial pace. It's happening overnight. So who the hell makes decisions in that? I'm sorry, go ahead, buddy.
I think it's interesting that you should mention retail, because as a teacher, I've seen some of my former students, working in retail, and some of them are still teenagers. And what is that like to be a teenager, helping out your family,
Right.
and, taking mass transit to work, and then to suddenly have the stop where you got off at moved half a mile away. That's what we're kind of looking at here.
Very human effects. And again, as someone who did the Lyft thing for a couple of years, on Sunday nights, the mall closed early. So if you were a Lyft driver, you basically hung out between the Amtrak station for people coming back to town and the mall, where there were a lot of younger young men and women who lived in South Providence, lived in Eastern Cranston, and who worked at the theater, in stores at the malls, And, you know, I talked a lot to these kiddos, and, you know, there were some really interesting emerging success stories of, in many cases, where young men and women really enjoyed working in retail and were trying to find a way to get into a Johnson Wales or get, you know, elevate themselves so they could get into management. And again, you know, that rug's been pulled out from underneath many of them. And then if you're going to make it more difficult, listen, unless you've worked in retail, you know, you say, well, it's their kids, it's a half a mile. All right. On a Sunday, when it's 25 or 30 degrees out, and you're working at a minimum wage job in order to support your family and also to try and get some type of income stream going for yourself, perhaps to pay for college or to save up to get a card so they can go to college, whatever. And you've just worked an eight-hour shift. You know, tell me just how little it means to walk that extra half a mile or a mile. Tell me about it.
Yeah. And the thing too is, you know, a lot of people are going to walk that extra half a mile because, you know, it's about a 10-minute bus ride from Providence Station to Dyer, where most people, their buses would be at Dyer. So you always have 10 minutes to wait for your bus, and you always have 10 minutes, you know, to wait for your transferring bus, right? So you're adding 30 minutes on. You might as well just walk, you know? And how fair is that to people? You know, how many car drivers would like it if they had a 30-minute walk to their job just added on? You know, I mean, bus passengers were just treated like second-class citizens.
I agree. So then the question becomes, how do we stop this madness? Can we stop this madness?
Well, we will stop this madness.
Excellent.
You know, there's a big coalition of people from the jewelry district that are very unhappy that this will be, you know, in their alliance, you know, in their backyard. And while our, you know, motivations may be different, you know, we are always willing to work with people who share our goals. And
strange bedfellows
right now.
Strange bedfellows. That's all I'll say. But you're right. I'll say it. You don't have to. If someone just sank, and I say this with gritted teeth, if someone just sank 300 large into a loft, and the notion that you know, in between their walk to what used to be Olga's is going to be this massive mini bus terminal is probably not that appealing to them. Well, you know, what do they say? You know, the strange bedfellows. But again, Kennedy Square works. It just doesn't work for one person.
You know, we both agree that Dyer Street is an inappropriate location for a bus hub. And so, you know, there's that. You know, the different groups in Providence, you know, concerned with, you know, architecture, history, may be concerned about this, you know, homeless rights groups, social justice groups, people from the environmental community are really all against this. And we are going to do whatever it takes. You know, you will see us out, you know, protesting, frankly.
Excellent.
And, you know, writing letters, protesting, just doing really whatever it takes to crush this project once and for all.
I like that.
And, you know, if the city were to revisit a plan that would keep the buses closer to Kennedy Plaza, I think that would be, you know, a good outcome for us. They did have a plan, which I think would be livable. I'm not going to officially endorse it, but, you know, we could work with the plan that the city of Providence developed with RIPTA that had public input. We can work with that, but we cannot work with a plan that riders had no input whatsoever in. We cannot work with that. We will not work with that. There is no way to modify this project to pacify us, and we will not be silenced on this issue.
That's outstanding. That's what I have so much respect for your group because you take things personally. Not only you're informative, you're well organized, but you take things personally. People in this town need to continue in some cases, and need to start in many others taking things personally. It is meant personally. Take them personally. With every fiber of your body, just fight this madness. Now more so than ever. It's in these communities, people are dying because of inadequate health care. These people are, being burdened with excessive licensing laws and all sorts of obstacles in their way for them to advance. They're underserved by so many of the city services that we pay dearly for. So, while we're trying to figure everything else out, the abominations like this need to be, and I will use your word, crushed, absolutely mercilessly crushed. And I don't know what you do about this individual who, again, sees the city as his own personal plaything. Joe Paolino does not own the city of Providence. He owns part of it. And he certainly does not own its people. And he continues to try and put his stamp everywhere from Newport, when he was literally pimping, and I use that term intentionally, a gambling spot, that would have just, that served no one but his own interests. And now, again, I often joke about this, but you're probably a bit young. I don't know if you ever watched Carl Burnett as a young in the Carl Burnett show, but she had this regular spoof on soap operas, and I think it applies to Mr. Paolino's adventures. She called it "As the Stomach Turns," and so he just has these continuing adventures where, and it's so ham-handed, and it's so it's grotesque. That's the most polite word I can use on family radio. It's absolutely grotesque. And again, I'm not trying to put you in an uncomfortable spot to demonize someone. I can do that all on my own. But you've got a lifetime of work here. Proven product where he's put his imprint on this city everywhere, and I have yet to understand why the accolades. I just don't see it. I can't think of many positives to the reign of economic terror, if you will, of one Joseph Paolino. He was mayor for a couple of years. He happened to be city council president. Congratulations.
Well, run for governor wouldn't surprise me.
Oh.
So.
Oh. Yeah, actually, you know what? I would welcome it, because the one thing about dramatic political elections like that is all of these individuals have records. And they're not pretty. And that's when you get to expose them once and for all. He may have been the ambassador to Malta. All right, whatever. He may have been a part-time mayor who more out of fate than any of his own work. But just stop it. There's an old saying where I come from: Joe Paolino, how can we miss you if you won't go away? It's just ridiculous. So again, this is turning into a bash fest, and I don't want to take away from the great work that you guys do. A lot of other issues on the plate, obviously, if you're a proponent of, or a supporter of, or a customer of, or all the above of mass transportation. What is RIPTA proposing you to do? What are they doing in terms of social distancing, in terms of hygienic issues, all of that? How is it working with COVID?
I have some great news and I have some bad news. So what should I start with?
You can tell I'm a cynical bastard. Let's go with the bad news first.
All right. So going back to the bathrooms at Kennedy Plaza, that has put people in an unhygienic and unsafe situation. I was at Burnside Park last week, and everywhere you walk in Burnside Park smells like urine. Everywhere. I'm not talking a little spot here or there.
I've been there. I know.
And, human waste has been seen in the area. It is disgusting. It is not right that a park, a playground where children play, should have that there. They absolutely must open up the bathrooms immediately. No question. We're talking hypodermic needles on the ground. Let's have a safe space to dispose of those. Absolutely. Um, Open up those bathrooms and just, please just give the people a place to pee. It's not a lot to ask.
No, it's
And
not. I'm sorry. Go ahead, buddy.
I'm sure some people might say, like, oh, people hanging around Kennedy Plaza, blah, blah, blah. Well, then do something about it. Find an old gym or something, a big space that would be COVID suitable, and turn it into a day shelter for homeless people to go to. But you can't just shut people out. That's not a good way to manage things. We need to always welcome people. And so, let's have a nice place for people to go, place for homeless people to go during the day. Let's also have, bathrooms. RIPTA has security guards, that could help with crowding issues, I suppose.
Listen, people, they're we've all heard the term "there, but for the grace of God, go I." We are about to enter economically a period both in Rhode Island and the United States where that is going to have a level of irony heretofore never seen. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of people who are in the pre-COVID world were living very comfortable middle-class existences, and God bless them. I mean, I would never deny anyone the fruits of their success. The reality is, though, that economic events are about to get ugly. And the notion that we, as a society, while we have the resources, wouldn't provide people with a place to just engage in all the things that human beings have to engage in. When money is being thrown around to airlines who, within 2 or 3 weeks of the incidence of COVID, went from, massive shareholder buybacks, got again their money, to all of a sudden being, asking us for literally billions because in order to keep their company alive, while at the same time denying small business people in Rhode Island their share of that money, while denying people the ability to live in some level of dignity, and while the money is there. You're right. I mean, it's such a simple step, and yet at the same time we would all benefit from it. It's depressing.
Open up the bathrooms. If they feel there are problems with crowding, put the people in homes. House people that are homeless. And so I feel that that's one issue. I definitely want to let people know. If you're going to Kennedy Plaza, the bathrooms are closed right now. You will have to go to City Hall, which has limited hours, or to the mall. And man, I've walked to the mall to use the bathroom and back, and that is quite a hike to add. I don't know what people would do who had a wheelchair. It just wouldn't be possible. It's really bad for the elderly and disabled and people with young children, especially, to not have a bathroom there. Another factor, could be if people are in the park, urinating. There's always that criminalizing the poor, getting someone in trouble for public urination when you've closed the bathroom that really should be open. So, I say open the bathrooms. If there are problems with crowding, like provide people with services, house people that are homeless, but it's just ridiculous that the bathrooms are closed. The bathrooms at the train station are open, ferry bathrooms are open, airport bathrooms are open. So just, open the effing bathrooms at Kennedy Plaza, please. So people can pee. Like, it's not a big ask. But the good news.
Yeah, the good news. Let's close off on some good news tonight. Let's have some happy times. Tell me.
So, there's a lot of research coming out to show that public transit is actually quite safe. There's almost no outbreaks that have been traced back to public transit. There was a controversial article in New York City that tried to link the outbreak of COVID to transit. I believe it was New York City, but there were some flaws in the methodology of that, so I don't want that to scare people. The vast majority of studies have shown that public transit is safe. One of the reasons for that is that fomite transfer, or touching, is not a main way that the virus spreads. And RIPTA also disinfects their bus every night with an EPA approved disinfectant. Ridership is way down. There's only 20,000 people a week riding the buses right now. Every bus that I've been on, there have been fewer than 3 people on every time. Everyone wears a mask. The bus drivers, I believe they've been told by RIPTA that they can't refuse service to people to masks. And I'm just going to say, for me personally, not as a Ride Transit rider representative, but just for me personally, I think RIPTA should be supporting their drivers and let their drivers not let anyone on who's not wearing a mask, unless it, could be a health issue. I think it's very unfair to place drivers in that position to be exposed like that.
And you're also interjecting them into some difficult situations in terms of people being argumentative. I mean, it's
right.
I think if simply giving the RIPTA drivers a box of masks and saying, "Here, wear this," would diffuse a lot of it. But at the same time, you're right. They have to be the captains of their ship, and they're also on the front line of becoming ill. So,
but as I said, every bus that I've been on, I have seen all the passengers wearing masks. I've seen bus drivers remind people before they get on about the masks. People do not sit close to each other. People don't talk to each other. It's very quiet, and, the drivers, they're just doing such a great job. Every driver that I've had during this time, they've just been so polite, and I just really, have to tip my hat to the RIPTA drivers because they do such a great job, and, they're facing the public every day, and it's not easy. Right. It's not easy at this time.
Right, and they've got families too. Absolutely.
Yeah, but research is showing, that public transit is very safe. If people are worried, there are steps you can take, maybe limiting the time you're on a bus, walking part of the way, opening up a window on a bus, definitely wearing a mask. But it is safe. And I have to say, just share something that I saw on Twitter. Check out our Twitter at TransitRye. A driver took her young son, a toddler, on the bus, and he was wearing a mask. So, a RIPTA driver can bring their child on a bus. I think that's a good sign that, people should feel confident and feeling safe to ride again.
Excellent. Well, what I'd love to do is have you on again soon. Perhaps the next time after there's a board meeting where perhaps to whatever degree possible, you can give us some insight onto the financial issues. I know you said RIPTA's been largely a balanced budget, but folks are wondering at this point, like any other transportation organization, whether it be an airline or a bus, what impact this is going to have on on the finances of the organization, as it has to redefine itself. What the unexpected consequences, the back and forth of every one of the issues we talked about earlier, whether it be retail, students, work, Providence, finances, everything. It's going to be chaotic with the finances of an organization like that. So I'd love to have you on again soon, and give us a little bit more insight into RIPTA ongoing. And in fact, we should really make this. As issues come up, I want you to know that you're welcome here anytime to present them. Please. Include us on whatever mailings you've got in terms of hearings on the whether it be the plan or anything other plots that are being hatched in the bowels of the east side of Providence.
Plots, I love that.
Yeah, God only knows. I got to get one last shot, and I've got this mental image of Joey in the basement next to the fake city with the trains and the Matchbox trucks, and him twirling his figurative mustache, going, "How can we screw poor Rhode Islanders next?" Is doing his own little Scrooge imitation. But that sounds ridiculous. But you know what? It might as well be, because that's some of the crap that happens.
You know what they say in Rhode Island? If there's no special interest, there's no interest.
Well, thank you. I'm going to do that. But I also say to Joe, don't step on the foot today that's connected to the ass you'll have to kiss tomorrow, Joe. So, and that's from the never written book, the sayings and the great sayings of the late Vincent A. Buddy Cianci. Listen, I want to thank you for joining us. Give us one more shot. Tell how folks can find you on the Facebook, on Twitter. So
folks can find us on Facebook at Rye Transit Riders, Rhode Island Transit Riders. Our Twitter is at Transit Rye. That's at capital T Transit Rye capitals. And, just want to let people know RIPTA is not going anywhere. They've told us, our plans may have slowed down a bit, but we're, going ahead with, getting, more buses that are good for environment, building infrastructure. They're still planning for the future. RIPTA is not in danger. The buses are pretty safe. Ridership is down, so they're fairly empty. If you take a ride, I feel safe. I take the bus. Mm-hmm. I just want people to feel confident in that. And I can look at our Facebook page for articles and stuff that I've shared on how public transit is actually fairly safe right now. Mm-hmm.
Is there a hearing imminent on the Kennedy Square Plaza, or is it sort of in remission right now? Is it bubbling underneath the surface?
I think the powers that be have put it out there and are kind of seeing how everyone reacts before they sort of repackage their message in a way that will be more appealing. Mm-hmm. So I will definitely let you know the next time there's a big development, and we'll definitely discuss this and stay on it until it's snuffed out forever.
Right, exactly. And unfortunately, government is weaponizing Zoom meetings because it's so much harder to provide passionate debate. It's so much more difficult to crowd the room with some placards and some folks who are stakeholders and who are directly impacted. So it's critical that we know, and I know sometimes the folks who are the stakeholders are the last to find out about one of these Zoom meetings. So yeah, whatever warning you can give us, so we can stuff the boxes. We can we can just sort of bombard them en masse at whatever hellish place they try to slip this through. God forbid this stuff is pushed through the budget. There's so many things in this state. Another story that are just pushed through the budget now, as opposed to any sort of separate series of public hearings, so people can understand how the sausage is getting made this week. But no, that's great. And again, I'm grateful that you reach out and continue, please, to use us as one of your forums to generate civic both knowledge and activity. We appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you, Pat. And it's just such a pleasure to talk to you every time. And definitely, we'll do this again soon.
All right, buddy.
And ride RIPTA.
All right. Amy Joy Glidden, she is one of the co-coordinators, I guess you would call it, yes, of her organization. They are dedicated to, well, let's just say they're gently and sometimes not so gently advocating for, on behalf of a variety of riders for RIPTA, with a special eye towards making sure that mass transportation is fair, safe, priced appropriately, and consistent with the values that we hold here and dear in Rhode Island. And to that, as I say to any civic activist who puts in the long hours, goes to the meetings, reads the bond reports, talks to people who are actively involved in using, in this case, mass transportation, it's this type of civic activism is the, short of serving in our armed forces, is the highest degree of activism and patriotism. Nothing says you care more about your community than doing this type of work. So again, my personal salute to you for just digging it out in the trenches. And some days it's got to be difficult. And as a result, there's a lot of folks who'll say, well, there are people out there who will take care of these things. Well, support them whether it's financially, support them spiritually by showing up for their meetings, support them by making the phone calls, support them by advocating for them, and most importantly, support them so that, quite frankly, they don't feel like they're alone in their battle, that that people recognize and give value to the time, the effort, the energy, and just the sheer sweat equity that they've got, and in this case, mass transportation Rhode Island. So, again, my salute, and have a great night.
Thank you. Good night.
We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network. If you could, like us, follow us, share us, save us, whatever. Social media is the mother's milk, if you will, of independent activism. It's how we get our message out above the white noise, the fray, the chaos. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty, mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Coalition version 1.0 at coalitionradio.us, and our new home, which is growing in fits and leaps and stages, at coalitionradionetwork.com. Folks, take it personally. Have a wonderful night.